Attention, because one dinner can dismantle a life. One false move can bring down an entire empire. For Richard Sterling, or Richie as he insisted on being called, this was meant to be the evening that would cement his legacy. He had the perfect deal on the table, a reservation at the Summit Room, the most exclusive penthouse restaurant in New York City, and what he believed was the perfect, captivated woman by his side. He was about to secure the multi-million-dollar investment that would save his company and launch him into stardom. But in his ascent to the top, Richard made a fatal, unforgivable error. He completely forgot who his wife truly was. He thought she was safely at a spa. He was about to discover that she owned the entire mountain. Richard Sterling checked his reflection in the tinted glass of the skyscraper, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. A Segna suit, a Patek Philippe on his wrist, and the scent of expensive cologne. These were the weapons of a man on the verge of greatness. Or at least, that was the image he projected. The reality was far more precarious. His tech startup, Innovate AI, was bleeding money. The brilliant algorithm meant to revolutionize logistics was proving too costly to scale, and his initial angel investors were jumpy. He was weeks, perhaps days, from total collapse. Tonight was his lifeline. A desperate, long-shot pass in the form of a mysterious and incredibly wealthy investor. "You look incredible, Richie," a sweet voice whispered beside him. He turned, flashing a practiced, charming smile. Clara Vance looked up at him with wide eyes, filled with an ambition and adoration he found intoxicating. She was 26, a junior marketing associate at his firm, sharp-featured, and with a hunger to move up the corporate ladder that mirrored his own. She was also his mistress. "Not as incredible as you, Clara," he said, his hand finding the small of her back. She wore a crimson dress, elegant and daring in equal measure, a piece he had specifically bought her for this occasion. "Tonight we are the power couple." Clara's smile widened. "So tell me about this investor again. You've been so secretive." "Because they are secretive," Richard explained, guiding her toward the valet. "It's a private equity firm, Ledesma Vanguard, LV Holdings. They are old school, but have been making aggressive moves in technology. The person we are meeting is the final decision maker, the one who signs the checks. They go by Evie Ledesma, just initials, no first name, old-fashioned, powerful. My sources say ruthless but fair. If they like the presentation, we're golden. $10 million golden." Clara's eyes practically gleamed. "And are you sure it's a man?" Richard let out a deep, condescending chuckle. "Trust me, in that financial world, the ones with that kind of power, the ones hiding behind initials, they are always men. Probably some 70-year-old titan named Edward or Eugene." He opened the door to his black Mercedes, the engine purring to life. As Clara slipped inside, he glanced at his phone. A single message from his wife, Evelyn, sent hours earlier. "Have a productive week, honey. The spa in Palm Springs is divine. Just what I needed. Love you." He tapped out a quick reply. "Missing you already. Relax and enjoy. You deserve it. Love you too." He felt a small, fleeting pang of guilt, which he quickly stifled with a wave of self-justification. Evelyn was a good woman, a wonderful wife. She was kind, stable, and came from a respectable family. But she was simple. She ran her late father's manufacturing business, a company that made high-quality fasteners and industrial components. It was a nuts and bolts, boring, practical, and utterly devoid of the vision and dynamism that fueled him. She didn't understand the pressure he was under, the thrill of innovation, the high-stakes game of venture capital. Her world was balance sheets and supply chains. His was the future. This spa retreat had been his idea. "You look tired, Eve," he had said a week ago, feigning concern. "You should take some time for yourself. Go to that place in Palm Springs you love. Disconnect." She had agreed, her smile grateful and modest. It was the perfect cover. With Evelyn enjoying massages and facials hundreds of miles away, he was free to woo his new investor, with his exciting new woman by his side. Bringing Clara wasn't just about desire. It was a strategic maneuver. She represented the youthful, cutting-edge energy of his company. She was part of the brand. Evelyn, with her sensible shoes and talk of profit margins, would have been an anchor. "So," Clara said, pulling him from his thoughts as they merged onto the highway, "when the deal is signed, what's the first thing we'll do?" Richard leaned over and squeezed her thigh. "First, I secure the company. Then, I start making some changes in my life. Big changes. For us." It was a lie, mostly. He had no concrete plans to leave Evelyn. A divorce was complicated and expensive. But it was the promise Clara needed to hear, the fuel that kept her loyal and eager. "I can't wait, Richie," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. Arriving at the Summit Room, New York's most coveted restaurant, Richard felt a surge of adrenaline. The maitre d', a stern-looking man named Jean-Paul, greeted him by name. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure. Your table is ready. The Burgundy Salon, as requested." "Excellent, Jean-Paul. Has my guest arrived? A Mr. Ledesma?" "Not yet, sir. You are the first." "Perfect." He led Clara through the hushed, opulent dining room, past tables of city council members and tech billionaires. The Burgundy Salon was at the back, a private space with a single large mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline, and its own dedicated server. This was his stage. Everything was perfect. The lighting, the view, the vintage bottle of Chateau Margaux he had pre-ordered. He and Clara sat, chatting, the anticipation mounting with every passing minute. Richard mentally rehearsed his opening lines, the key data points, the vision he would sell. He was ready. He was in control. At 8:05 p.m. sharp, 5 minutes past the reservation time, the waiter approached discreetly. "Mr. Sterling, your guest has arrived." Richard stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket. He put on his $1,000,000 smile, the one that had charmed investors and disarmed rivals. "Excellent. Send them in." He held out his hand, his eyes fixed on the door, ready to greet the elderly titan who held his future in their hands. The door opened, and Richard Sterling's perfectly constructed world didn't just crack. It vaporized. Time seemed to distort, stretching and compressing in the span of a single heartbeat. Richard's hand, extended in a welcoming gesture, froze in the air. His $1,000,000 smile faltered, trembling at the corners, before collapsing completely into an open-mouthed grimace of disbelief. His mind, usually a calculating sharp machine, churned with a single nonsensical word. No, it wasn't a 70-year-old industry titan named Edward or Eugene who walked through the door. It was his wife. Evelyn Ledesma Sterling paused at the threshold, her presence instantly dominating the entire room. This was not the Evelyn he had dropped off at the airport for her spa retreat. The woman he knew favored practical, smart business suits in sober shades of navy and pearl gray, her hair pulled back in a demure bun. She was beautiful, but in a quiet, understated way he had long ago begun to take for granted. The woman standing before him was a stranger, forged from the familiar. Her honey-blonde hair was not discreetly pinned up. It was swept into a sophisticated chignon, revealing the elegant line of her neck and a pair of diamond earrings that glittered like shards of ice. She wore a deep emerald green custom-made silk evening gown, clinging to her figure in a way he hadn't seen in years. It was a dress that spoke not of understated elegance, but of deliberate, unrepentant power. Her face, which he was used to seeing with minimal makeup, was flawlessly sculpted. Her lips were painted a bold, confident red, and her eyes, those familiar, gentle blue eyes, were sharp, focused, and utterly, terrifyingly cold. She held a leather portfolio in one hand, and her gaze swept the scene before her with slow, deliberate evaluation. It passed from the obscenely expensive wine bottle on the table to Clara's shocked, confused face in her revealing crimson dress, and finally landed on him, on his outstretched hand, on his stunned expression. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant clink of cutlery from the main dining room, a world away. Clara glanced from Richard to Evelyn, and back again, her brow furrowed. A nascent horror began to crawl into her expression as she connected the dots. The last name, Ledesma, Evelyn's maiden name. Evelyn Victoria Ledesma. Evelyn took a step into the room, her heels tapping softly on the polished wood floor. The sound was like a judge's gavel. "Richard," she said, and her voice was the greatest surprise of all. It wasn't the warm, familiar tone of his wife. It was crisp, cool, and carried an authority he had never heard from her before. "You look surprised to see me. Please don't let me interrupt. Were you expecting Evie Ledesma?" She gave a small, humorless smile. "That's me, Evelyn Victoria Ledesma. I find that using initials in preliminary correspondence helps to eliminate a lot of the bias. You'd be surprised how many men just assume a venture capitalist must also be a man, wouldn't you?" Richard finally managed to drop his hand, his arm feeling impossibly heavy. His throat was dry. "Evelyn, what is this? What are you doing here? I thought you were in Palm Springs." "The trip to Palm Springs was canceled," she stated, her voice flat, offering no further explanation. She directed her cold gaze at Clara, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "And you are—" Clara shot a panicked look at Richard, who was still struggling to process the catastrophic shift in reality. I'm Clara Vance," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm the Director of Marketing Synergy at Innovate AI." "Director of Marketing Synergy?" Evelyn repeated the title slowly, as if tasting something unfamiliar and unpleasant. "Impressive title. Richard has always been creative with those. Last I checked the company roster, that position was held by a man named David Pierce." The air crackled with the unspoken truth. Clara visibly shrank in her seat, her face flushing a shade that clashed horribly with her dress. Evelyn's gaze returned to her husband. The coolness in her eyes was now mingled with a deep, stinging disappointment. "I believe, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register, "that you and I had a business dinner scheduled to discuss the future of your company. I don't recall Miss Vance's presence being on the agenda. It seems you have made quite a significant administrative error." She placed her portfolio on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "This meeting is about a $10 million investment. It requires a certain level of professionalism and discretion, qualities that appear to be in short supply tonight." She looked directly at Clara. Her expression was not one of anger, but of complete and total dismissal, as if addressing a wayward child who had wandered into a boardroom. "Miss Vance, your presence here is inappropriate and no longer required. You may leave." It was not a request. It was an order, delivered with the absolute certainty of one accustomed to being obeyed. The power dynamic in the room had been irrevocably altered. Richard Sterling, the aspiring king in his private room, was no longer in command. He hadn't been from the moment she had walked through that door. Completely humiliated, Clara fumbled for her clutch bag on the table. She looked at Richard, her eyes pleading for him to say something, to defend her, to fix this nightmare. But Richard was silent. He was a statue, his mind reeling as the two separate worlds he had so carefully cultivated. His stable home life with his simple wife, and his exciting, high-risk professional life with his ambitious mistress, had just collided with the force of a supernova. And in the wreckage, he was starting to grasp that the woman he had dismissed as a supporting player was, in fact, the one who had written the entire play. Clara stood up, her chair scraping a discordant screech against the floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Her face was a canvas of humiliation and raw fury. She threw one last desperate look at Richard, a silent plea for him to intercede, to assert the authority he had so confidently displayed moments before. Richard met her gaze, but his eyes were empty. He was a man in free fall, the floor having disappeared beneath him. He offered nothing, no defense, no explanation, no comfort. In that moment, Clara saw him for what he was, a hollow man, a pretender stripped of his borrowed crown. The power that had so attracted her was an illusion, and its source was the very woman who was now dismissing her like a server. With a choked sob of pure mortification, Clara turned and fled the room, her crimson dress a slash of color against the restaurant's sober elegance as she disappeared. The waiter, who had been discreetly outside the door, glanced in with a flash of professional curiosity before closing the door softly, leaving Richard and Evelyn alone in the burgundy salon. The silence that descended was heavier than stone. The magnificent view of the city lights seemed to mock Richard, a glittering testament to a world he was no longer a part of. Finally, he slumped into his chair, the strength gone from his legs. He looked at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time in years, perhaps ever. The diamonds in her ears, the silk of her dress, the unyielding steel in her spine. They weren't new additions. They were facets of her that he had simply chosen not to see, blinded by his own arrogance. "How?" he finally whispered, the word rough and hoarse. "How did you do it? Ledesma Vanguard Holdings. How?" Evelyn did not sit down. She remained standing, a position of dominance. She walked to the table and calmly poured herself a glass of water from the crystal carafe. Her movements were fluid and controlled. "My father was a brilliant businessman, Richard. He built Ledesma Manufacturing from nothing, but he was also a traditionalist. He believed in tangible assets, machinery, real estate, physical product. He never trusted the volatility of the stock market or the ethereal nature of venture capital." She took a slow sip of water. "But I am not my father." She set the glass down. "When he passed away 3 years ago and I took over, I did exactly what you always condescendingly advised me to do. I modernized. I streamlined production, automating where I could. Ledesma Manufacturing became so efficient that its profits tripled within 2 years. That created significant capital that needed to be put to work." She gestured around the room. "So I founded a holding company, a private one, Ledesma Vanguard Holdings, a way to honor the past, Ledesma, and invest in the future, Vanguard. I hired the best financial minds in the country, people you've only read about in the Wall Street Journal. And for the last 2 years, while you were busy playing visionary with Innovate AI, I was quietly and methodically building an empire." Richard's head was spinning. The boring family business he had so often belittled was not just stable. It was a cash-generating behemoth. The wife he thought was content with spreadsheets and inventory reports was operating at a level he could only dream of. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice tinged with a pathetic mix of accusation and hurt. A bitter laugh escaped Evelyn's lips. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "Tell you? For what, Richard? So you could offer your expertise? So you could advise me on how to run my business, just as you've run yours into the ground? So you could view my success not as our success, but as a new source of funding for your next failed venture? Or perhaps so you could feel even more emasculated than you already did, and find comfort in the arms of girls like, what was her name? Clara. The name hung in the air between them, poisonous and sharp. "I know everything, Richard," she said, her voice dropping back to that dangerously low level. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is a one-time mistake." She pulled a thin file from her portfolio and tossed it onto the table in front of him. It slid across the polished wood and stopped by his plate. "You are a creature of habit," she continued, her tone clinical, as if describing a specimen under a microscope. "You always use the supplementary Amex card for your indiscretions. The one on the joint account you likely assumed I never checked." A charge for a hotel. The Vance Hotel. 2 months ago you told me you were at a tech conference in Chicago, but the charge was from a boutique hotel only 6 miles from our home. An expensive one. That was the first thread, and I am very, very good at pulling threads. He stared at the file, not daring to open it. He didn't need to. He knew what was inside. Pictures, dates, times, the meticulous work of a private investigator, the whole sordid history of his affair with Clara, and probably others he had carelessly forgotten. "You came to me, well, to Evie Ledesma, out of desperation," Evelyn continued, her dissection of him relentless and brutal. "Your pitch deck was impressive on the surface, full of buzzwords and optimistic projections. But my team and I did our due diligence. We looked under the hood of Innovate AI, and what we found was a mess. You have overspent, overpromised, and you're running on fumes with your initial investors. You are on the verge of insolvency. This $10 million investment was not for scaling. It was to plug the holes in your sinking ship." She finally moved, walking around the table to stand by the window, her back to him, as she gazed out at the glittering city. "I have to admit," she said, her voice tinged with a new, colder emotion, "I was tempted to simply let you fail, to watch from a distance as your ego and incompetence led you to your inevitable ruin. But then I realized something. My name is still attached to yours. My reputation is in some small way linked to yours, and I will not allow your failures to tarnish the name my father built." She turned to face him, and the last vestiges of the woman he thought he knew were gone. In her place was a CEO, a strategist, a queen on a chessboard of her own design. "So, no, Richard, I am not here to invest in you. I am not here to save you. I am here to end this, on my terms." Richard looked at the file on the table, then at Evelyn. The world had tilted on its axis, and he was struggling to find his footing. The woman he was married to, the woman he had mentally relegated to a supporting role in the grand drama of his life, was not just the lead actress. She was the writer, director, and producer. "You planned this?" he gasped, the realization dawning. "All of it. The spa retreat, letting my application make it to the final stage. You set a trap for me." "Don't flatter yourself by calling it a trap, Richard," Evelyn countered, her voice sharp as glass. "A trap implies a level of play. This was a diagnosis. I needed to see the full extent of the illness before deciding on the cure. Your funding application to Ledesma Vanguard landed on my desk 3 weeks ago. Imagine my surprise. It was a perfect opportunity to get an unvarnished look at the truth of both your business and your character. She walked back to the table and finally took a seat across from him, the vast expanse of polished mahogany feeling like an abyss between them. "Let's discuss your character, shall we?" she said, lacing her hands in front of her. "For 10 years I have supported you. When you quit your stable job at Oracle to chase this dream, whose savings did we use as seed capital? Mine. When you needed a co-signer for your first business loan because the bank saw you as a risk, whose name and impeccable credit history was put on the line? Mine. I have attended countless boring networking events. I have smiled at your arrogant colleagues and listened to you talk about disruption and synergy until my ears bled. I did it because I was your wife, because I believed in the man I married." Her voice, for the first time, held a tremor of raw, genuine pain, but it was quickly repressed, replaced by a cold fury. "And how did you repay that loyalty? You patronized me. You treated my business, the business that paid our mortgage, funded our lifestyle, and backstopped your fantasies, like a quaint little hobby. You lied to me, and you brought that girl to a dinner where you intended to beg for money, thinking you could showcase her as a symbol of your dynamic brand. Did you truly think I was so stupid, so blind? Or did you just not think about me at all?" Richard had no answer. The truth was, he hadn't thought about her at all. In his mind, he made his life with her exist in a separate sphere, one that didn't intersect with his ambitions or his indiscretions. She was the stable, predictable foundation upon which he could build his exciting, unpredictable life. He had never considered that the foundation might have its own architecture, its own power. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he mumbled. The words felt hollow, inadequate. The apology of a child for breaking a priceless vase. "You're sorry?" she scoffed. "Don't dare say you're sorry. I'm sorry is what you say when you accidentally bump into someone. It is not a word that can encompass this level of betrayal. You are not sorry you cheated. You are sorry you got caught in the most humiliating way imaginable." She was right. The deepest emotion he felt at that moment was not remorse, but a deep, sickening shame. He had been so certain of his own brilliance, his own superiority. He had seen the world and everyone in it as pieces on his personal chessboard. Now he was looking across the board at the true master of the game, realizing he had been a pawn all along. "Let's move on to business," Evelyn said, her tone snapping back to that of a CEO. She opened her own portfolio, the one she had placed on the table. "Because your personal failings are, frankly, no longer my primary concern. They are merely a symptom of the same arrogance that has crippled your company." She slid a document across the table. It was a detailed analysis of Innovate AI, prepared by her team at Ledesma Vanguard. It was brutal. "Your core algorithm is clever," she conceded. "Genuinely innovative. It is the only real asset you have. But everything around it is a mess. Your cash burn rate is catastrophic. You've spent almost $1 million on office aesthetics and perks, a kombucha tap for goodness sake, while your top engineers are being poached by competitors because you can't afford to match their salary offers. Your marketing strategy, presumably headed by Miss Vance, is all noise and no substance, with a customer acquisition cost that is 3 times the industry average." She tapped her finger on a specific line item. "And this is my favorite part. You listed your 5-year projected revenue at $50 million, a bold claim, but you based it on securing 3 major shipping contracts that, my sources tell me, have already provisionally signed with your main competitor, Logicorp, because you failed to deliver a functional beta on time." Every word was a hammer blow. systematically dismantling the last vestiges of his self-delusion. He had been telling himself these were temporary setbacks, bumps on the road to glory. Hearing them exposed so clinically, so dispassionately, by his wife, he was forced to face the truth. He was not a visionary on the brink of success. He was a failure on the brink of collapse. "So you see, Richard," Evelyn concluded, her voice devoid of emotion, "Innovate AI as a going concern is worthless to me. A $10 million investment wouldn't save it. It would only postpone the funeral." Richard felt a cold chill run down his spine. "So you're just going to walk away? Let it die?" Evelyn's lips curved into that small, chilling smile again. "Oh no, I'm not walking away. I told you. I'm here to end this. On my terms." She slid another document across the table. This one was thicker. He looked at the cover page, and the blood drained from his face. It was titled, "Asset Purchase Agreement." "As I said," Evelyn explained calmly, "your company is a mess, but the algorithm at its core is valuable. The patent you filed is also valuable. Those are assets that interest me. Your company is currently valued at next to nothing and carries over $7 million in debt. Your investors are ready to flee, and a lawsuit for mismanagement is all but guaranteed once the Logicorp contracts are announced." She leaned back in her chair, the picture of calm, lethal control. "I am prepared to offer you a deal. Ledesma Vanguard will purchase Innovate AI's debts. We will take them off your hands, saving you from personal bankruptcy and years of litigation. In exchange, you will sign over the company, its patents, and all its intellectual property to me. In essence, Richard, I offer to buy your failure." The document lay on the table between them, an obituary for his dreams. Asset purchase agreement. The words were so cold, so corporate. It wasn't a rescue. It was a liquidation, a hostile takeover orchestrated by his own wife. "You want to buy my company for the price of its debt?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. The audacity was breathtaking. It was the move of a predator, something he would have admired in anyone else. Coming from Evelyn, it was devastating. "You want to take everything I've built?" "Built?" Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "Let's be honest, Richard. You haven't built a company. You have built a facade. A very expensive, very unstable facade around one good idea. An idea, I might add, that you failed to execute. I'm not taking what you've built. I'm salvaging the one valuable component from the wreckage before it sinks to the ocean floor." He shook his head, a desperate denial taking root. "No, I won't do it. I'll find another investor. I'll figure something out." Evelyn sighed, a sound of weary patience, like a professor dealing with a particularly slow student. "Another investor? Richard, my team at Ledesma Vanguard is one of the most respected due diligence teams in the country. A summary of their findings, the ones I just described to you, will circulate among the venture capital community by morning. I won't even have to leak it. Bad news travels fast. No one will touch Innovate AI with a 10-foot pole after tonight. You are radioactive." She was right. The financial world was small. Once word got out that Ledesma had walked away from the deal after a final meeting, everyone would know something was profoundly wrong. His already fragile reputation would be shattered. "And what about your other options?" she continued, pressing her advantage relentlessly. "You can file for bankruptcy. The court will appoint a trustee who will sell the company's assets for pennies on the dollar to pay your creditors. The algorithm, the patents, they will go to the highest bidder. It might be Logicorp. It might be me. But you will get nothing. In fact, since you signed personal guarantees on some of those loans, I checked. They will come after our house. The house my father paid for." The mention of the house was a deliberate, piercing blow. He felt the last of his fight drain out of him. He was cornered, outmaneuvered at every turn. He had walked into this dinner believing he was the player, only to discover he was the prize being parceled out. "Why are you doing this, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is this revenge? To punish me for Clara?" Evelyn was silent for a long moment, considering the question. "At first, yes," she admitted, her voice losing its hard edge for a split second, revealing the bruised heart underneath. "When I first saw the investigators' photos, all I felt was rage. I wanted to destroy you. I wanted to make you feel as small and as foolish as you made me feel." She looked away, toward the window, but as I dug deeper into your business, as I saw the depth of your incompetence and deceit, the emotion changed. It became clearer. This is not about punishment, Richard. This is about control. You took control owned from me and our marriage. You made a mockery of my trust and my commitment. I will not allow you to do the same to my financial security and my family's legacy. This is me taking back control. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and resolute. "The algorithm you developed is brilliant. In the hands of my engineering team, integrated with Ledesma Manufacturing's logistics network, it could genuinely revolutionize the industry. It could be worth billions. I will not allow that potential to die with your ego. I am a businesswoman. This is a sound business decision." The cruelty was in its logic. She had stripped away the emotion and turned his personal and professional collapse into a calculated acquisition. She wasn't just the scorned wife. She was the shrewd investor, capitalizing on a distressed asset. He looked at the agreement. His signature on that line would mean the end of everything. Innovate AI would cease to be his. His name would be erased from its history. He would be a footnote. "What happens to me?" he asked, the question small and pathetic. "That is up to you," Evelyn said. "Sign the agreement tonight, and the handover is clean. Ledesma Vanguard assumes the debt. You walk away with nothing, but you also owe nothing. You will be free from the lawsuits and the creditors. You will have a chance to start over, somewhere else, as someone else. And if I don't sign, if you don't sign, I will walk out of this room, and at 9 a.m. tomorrow, I will have filed for divorce. I will also contact your core investors, Mr. Mendez and Ms. Torres, and as a professional courtesy, I will share my team's analysis of Innovate AI's financial health with them. Their lawyers will be on you before noon. Your company will be dead by the end of the week, and you will be buried in litigation for the next 5 years. The choice is yours." It was checkmate, a flawlessly executed, utterly ruthless checkmate. There were no more moves left to make. He thought of Clara, fleeing in humiliation. He thought of his investors, whose money he had squandered. He thought of his employees, whom he had failed. And he thought of Evelyn, this stranger sitting across from him, who had utterly outclassed him. With a trembling hand, Richard reached for the pen lying beside the contract. The Patek Philippe on his wrist felt like a cheap accessory. He uncapped the pen. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked at Evelyn one last time, searching for any hint of mercy, of regret, of the woman he once knew. He found none. All he saw was the cold, evaluating stare of Evie Ledesma, the investor who had just closed the deal of her life. He signed his name, the dream of Richard Sterling, the tech visionary, dying right there on the table in the burgundy salon at the Summit Room. The moment the ink of his signature dried, a profound, irreversible shift occurred. It was as if a spell had been broken. The power, the ambition, the very identity he had built for himself, evaporated into the rarefied air of the restaurant. He was no longer Richard Sterling, CEO. He was just Richard, a man with an expensive, useless watch and a suit he no longer had a reason to wear. Evelyn took the signed document, her movements precise. She reviewed his signature with an expert eye. Then she slid it carefully back into her portfolio. She didn't gloat. There was no triumphant smile, just the quiet efficiency of a completed transaction. "My attorney, Mr. Herrera, will contact yours tomorrow morning to finalize the transfer," she said, her voice purely business. "I suggest you cooperate fully. It will be cleaner for everyone." She stood up, her composure as unwavering as it had been when she first walked in. "The dinner has been paid for, including the wine you ordered. Consider it severance." The final cut landed with brutal accuracy. He couldn't even pay for the meal he had intended to use to seal his future. Without another word, Evelyn turned and walked toward the door. Richard watched her leave, a ghost at his own execution. Her emerald dress, her confident stride, the quiet power she radiated. It was the image of a fully realized woman, one stepping into her own spotlight. As her hand touched the doorknob, he spoke her name. One last time. "Evelyn." She paused, still facing away. "Was any of it real?" he asked, the raw question carrying a desperation he didn't know he was capable of. "Our life? Our marriage?" She was silent for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was softer, tinged with a distant, weary sadness that was somehow more devastating than her anger. "I was real, Richard," she said, without turning around. "I just don't think you ever were." And then she was gone. The door closed behind her, sealing him in the silent, opulent tomb he had chosen for himself. 6 months later, spring sunshine streamed through the panoramic windows of a corner office on the 40th floor. The view was even better than the one at the Burgundy Salon in the summit room. The office was minimalist and modern, with clean lines, contemporary art, and a large desk made of reclaimed wood and steel. On the desk, a small, elegant plaque read, "Evelyn Ledesma, CEO. Vanguard Tech." Evelyn stood by the window, sipping a cup of coffee, gazing out at the city. Vanguard Tech was the new entity she had formed after acquiring the Innovate AI assets. She had purged the old company, firing the sycophants and overpaid executives, and promoting the talented but overlooked engineers. Integrated with Ledesma Manufacturing's logistics backbone, the algorithm, now known as Vanguard Logic, was thriving. They had just secured a landmark deal with North America's largest shipping conglomerate, the very deal Richard had failed to close. It was a contract valued in the hundreds of millions, and it was only the beginning. She was different now. The transformation that had begun that night at the summit room had solidified. There was an unshakable confidence in her posture, a clarity in her gaze. The quiet strength she had always possessed was now visible to the world. She ran her empire with precision, fairness, and a shrewdness that had become legendary in both the tech and finance sectors. She was Evie Ledesma, in person and in reputation. A knock came at her door. It was David Pierce, the man Clara had replaced. Evelyn had not only rehired him, but promoted him to Chief Operating Officer. "Board meeting in 5, Evelyn," he said, with a respectful smile. "Quarterly projections are even better than we expected." "Thanks, David. I'm on my way," she replied, her own smile genuine. As he left, her gaze drifted to a small framed photo on her bookshelf. It was of her and her father, standing in front of the original Ledesma manufacturing plant, years ago. She had honored his legacy, and then built one of her own, greater than he ever could have imagined. She had found her purpose not as a wife, but as a founder. Miles away, in an anonymous, sprawling suburb of Dallas, the midday sun beat down on the asphalt of a car dealership. A man in a slightly too tight, branded Auto Solaire polo approached a young couple looking at minivans. "Looking for something safe and reliable for the family?" he asked, his voice strained with manufactured enthusiasm. It was Richard. The Patek Philippe was gone, replaced by a cheap digital watch. The Segna suits were replaced by company-issued khakis. After the collapse of Innovate AI, he had been a pariah. His name was toxic in the tech world. His friends had evaporated. Penniless and without prospects, he had been forced to take a commission-only job, selling cars at his cousin's dealership. He spent his days reciting scripts about fuel efficiency and trunk space, his nights in a tiny rented apartment that smelled of stale coffee. He would sometimes see articles about Vanguard Tech and its brilliant, enigmatic CEO, Evelyn Ledesma. He would read them with a hollow ache in his chest, a mixture of envy, regret, and a strange, distant pride. He had seen the brilliance in her, right at the very end. He just hadn't been man enough to recognize it when it mattered. He never heard from Clara Vance again. A quick online search revealed she had moved to another city and taken a low-level marketing job. She, too, had been cast out of the story. As Richard explained the benefits of the fold-flat seating, he caught his reflection in the polished chrome of a minivan hubcap. The face that stared back was tired, defeated, and painfully ordinary. The king had become a commoner, haunted by the ghost of a queen he had created and then betrayed. He had wanted to build a legacy, and he somehow had. He was the man who had dinner with his mistress, only to discover his wife owned the restaurant, the table, and his entire world. It was a cautionary tale he would carry with him for the rest of his life. 1 year later, the city's philanthropic elite gathered for the annual Children's Foundation Gala. The event was held in the Crystal Ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel, a cavern of glittering chandeliers and the soft clink of champagne flutes. At the center of it all, a quiet center of gravity, in a stunning midnight blue gown, was Evelyn Ledesma. In 12 months, she had become not only a force in the tech world, but a celebrated benefactress. Vanguard Tech was the main sponsor of the gala, and her name was on everyone's lips in the room. She moved through the crowd with an easy grace, accepting compliments and engaging in quiet, meaningful conversations. She was no longer just in her element. She was the element. On the far side of the room, near a service entrance, a man in a rented tuxedo nursed a glass of sparkling water. He looked pale and thin, a phantom haunting the edges of a party he no longer belonged to. Richard Sterling's cousin, a mid-level accountant whose firm had a corporate table, had taken pity on him and offered a spare ticket. "Get out. Go see people, Richie," he had said. "It'll do you good." It wasn't doing him good. It was torture. Every laugh, every clink of jewelry, every confident handshake was a reminder of the world he had forfeited. He had spent the last year in the humiliating purgatory of sales targets and customer satisfaction surveys. He was no longer Richard Sterling, CEO. He was just Richie from Auto Solaire, a man who could tell you the precise cargo capacity of a 2026 model minivan, but who had forgotten the language of ambition. He saw her from across the room, and his breath hitched in his throat. It was like watching a star being born. He knew she was successful. It was impossible to avoid the business journals that lauded her as the vanguard visionary. But seeing her in person, commanding such natural respect, was different. This wasn't just a woman who had won. This was a woman who was born to rule, and he had simply been standing in her light. His first instinct was to flee. He turned to slip out the service door and retreat to the anonymity of his rented apartment. But he was too late. As she turned from a conversation with the mayor, her eyes scanned the room, and for one brief, terrifying moment, they met his. There was no shock in her expression, no anger, just a flash of quiet, distant recognition. For an instant, he thought she would simply look away, dismiss him as part of the scenery. But then, with a deliberate calm that sent a shiver down his spine, she excused herself from her circle and began to walk toward him. The vast ballroom seemed to shrink. Every step she took was a drumbeat marking the final moments of his delusion. He couldn't run. He was pinned by the sheer force of her presence. She stopped a few feet from him. Up close, he could see the fine, confident lines around her eyes that weren't there before. She looked serene. "Evelyn," he managed to say. His own voice sounded weak and unfamiliar. You look incredible. Congratulations on all the success." "Thank you," she replied, with a small, impersonal nod. "Vanguard has a good team." There was no trace of irony in her tone. It was a simple statement of fact. An awkward silence stretched between them. He felt a desperate need to fill it, to say something meaningful, to bridge the galaxy that now separated them. "Listen, Eve, Evelyn," he stammered. "I know it's a year too late, and I know it means nothing now, but I really am sorry. For everything. For what I did to you. To us. I was a fool. An arrogant, blind fool." She listened patiently, her expression unmoving. When he finished, she simply looked at him, her gaze analytical rather than emotional. "Yes," she said. "You were." The simple, unadorned agreement was more wounding than any curse. It was a diagnosis, delivered long after the patient's fate had been sealed. "I just wanted you to know," he finished awkwardly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. She looked at him for another long moment, and then she did something he never expected. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was appreciative. "You know, Richard?" Her voice was quiet. "In a strange way, I should thank you." He stared at her, utterly bewildered. "Thank me? For what?" "For showing me what I was capable of," she explained. "I spent 10 years living as a fraction of myself because I thought that's what our marriage required. I made myself smaller to make you feel bigger. Your betrayal, painful as it was a cataclysm. It destroyed the world I knew, but it forced me to build my own. I wouldn't be standing here tonight as who I am if you hadn't done what you did." Then she wasn't forgiving him. She was evaluating him. He was a data point in her history, the catalyst in an equation that had led to her own greatness. His greatest act of betrayal was, for her, the ultimate act of liberation. It was the final, most devastating twist of the knife. He wasn't even the villain of her story anymore. He was just the prologue. "I hope you find your own way, Richard," she said, her voice softening with a hint of genuine, distant pity. "Goodbye." With that, she turned and walked away, gliding back toward the center of the room, leaving him alone by the service door. He watched as she was immediately absorbed back into her world, laughing at something the mayor said, once again the star at the heart of her own universe. He was completely and utterly forgotten, and in that final, crushing moment, Richard Sterling finally understood. He hadn't just lost his company, or his wife. He had lost the right to even be a character in her story. He was nothing, and from nothing, he would have to learn to begin again. Wow, what a story of karma, consequence, and the astonishing power of an underestimated woman. Richard Sterling thought he was playing a game, but he didn't even understand the board. Evelyn's journey from quiet supporter to corporate titan is a powerful reminder that the strongest people are not always the loudest. She didn't just get revenge. She built an empire from the ashes of her husband's betrayal, proving that the best success is living well and on your own terms. If you were moved by Evelyn's incredible story of taking back her power, please hit the like button to show your support. What do you think Richard should have done differently? Do you think Evelyn was fair or too harsh? Let us know your thoughts on this poetic justice in the comments below. We want to read your deepest reflections. Share this video or article with someone who needs to see that the quietest people often have the most to say. And of course, if you love stories of epic twists and satisfying justice, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update.